Welcome. On behalf of Barnard College and Women in Hollywood, it is my honor to welcome you to the 11th Annual Athena Film Festival. This festival is dedicated to celebrating the stories of bold, courageous women leaders and the filmmakers who bring their stories to life. Thank you for joining us. I am Melissa Silverstein, the co-founder and artistic director of the festival, and I am also the founder and publisher of Women in Hollywood. This year's festival would not be possible without the support of our dedicated sponsors. Please join me in thanking Athena's founding sponsor, the Artemis Rising Foundation, and its CEO and founder, Regina K. Scully, whose visionary leadership makes our work possible. A special thank you as well to our premier level sponsor, the Alfred P. Schlain Foundation, which shares our commitment to showcasing stories of women in science. To all of our sponsors whose names you will see before each film and event, thank you for your commitment to challenging our culture to be more inclusive and inspiring audiences in the process. This year, a year that unlike any that we have all dealt with previously, we wanted to create something new and exciting to bring to our community. So we created 8 different program areas that we believe react and respond to our current moment. This conversation is part of our Resilience Through Uncertainty program area. In this program area, we ask the question, what does resilience look like? How do we move through the fog of uncertainty and come out the other side? Through films and conversations, we'll investigate and showcase the exhaustion and devastation and the powerful manifestations of perseverance and hope that keep people going. This panel is entitled Emerging at Your Own Pace, Different Pathways in Film. Here's a quick overview. Too often we associate emerging with young, and Lord knows Hollywood already has an ageism problem. Let's undo some of that. We have 2 guests with us who work in different areas of the industry and can share their thoughts on this topic. Welcome. Let me introduce our guests. First, Kenyatta Raylan is an award-winning Los Angeles-based screenwriter and filmmaker. Recently, she was a participant in the Writers Lab NYC, supported by Meryl Streep and NYWIFT. In 2019, Kenyatta won several top honors and awards for her writing, including the Screencraft Drama Screenwriting Contest, Writers Assistant Network Web Series Production Contest, and the Filmmaker, I like that, Web Series Production Grant for her comedy series script, Day Shift Pilot, a comedy about dancers in a strip club. As a director, Kenyatta shadowed in season 2 of The Chai, a drama created by Lena Waithe, and she also directed an episode of a new media comedy web series called Adversity, a satire about diversity and inclusion, starring Enrico Colantoni, is that right? Did I pronounce that right? Colantoni? Of CW's Veronica Mars. Kenyatta has been producing and directing shorts since 2012. Tanya Sivaratnam is an artist, writer, Emmy-nominated, multiple Webby-winning producer. She has produced for the Vision and Justice Project, Joy to the Polls, Aubin Pictures, Glamour Woman of the Year, The Meteor, For Freedoms, and Planned Parenthood. Sivaratnam is the author of The Big Lie and Assume Nothing, a story of intimate violence, which is coming out next week. Congratulations. And her essays have been published in the New York Times, Vogue, Glamour, CNN, and McSweeney's. Welcome, both of you, to this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Melissa.
I feel all of us, resilience is like our middle name now.
Yes, absolutely. It's been a year of it's in this pandemic for sure.
Absolutely. So the world we live in, women tend to go on many journeys in their lives. I know for sure I'm one of those people. So I'd love for each of you to talk a bit about your journey to where you are now, not in, like in about a couple of minutes, and what lessons you have learned along the way. Kenyatta, you want to start?
What lessons I've learned along the way? Well, there are so many, but in the last 10 years, I'd say the biggest lesson I've learned, if I could go back 10 years to myself, is focus. To absolutely focus on the goal. I have a lot of passions, but in order to make this particular dream come true, I had to make a decision to focus on it and wrap my life around it. And that sped up the trajectory. when I did that. So the idea of emerging, I've been emerging for 10 years, but I feel like things really have sped up and took off once I decided to put this dream, this particular dream, in focus and in front of everything else.
And the dream is for you to be a writer-director.
Correct. Correct. To be a television writer, to be a writer-director. And then I have other dreams that are more entrepreneurial, which I have a passion for, but this really is the dream that I need to accomplish. And I feel like there is a little bit more of a time limit on this than there was on other dreams.
I want to come back to the time limit thing. Tanya, talk a little bit about your journey, where you are now, and some of the lessons you've learned along the way.
My journey began in Sri Lanka, where I was born, and I came to the United States as a toddler. And my career journey really kicked in around the time that I met you, Melissa, which was in 1995 at the Women's Conference in China. I was
met?
Yes.
In the youth tent.
Yes.
Because we were the youth then.
We were the youth then, and here we are now.
We are so not the youth anymore.
No, although I still feel like I am winging it and learning every day. And the lessons I've learned have been to be open and to be curious, to be a good listener, and to really be mindful of the people you collaborate with and the projects you take on, and also to figure out what you need to do to support the thing you want to do.
Right.
And film has emerged as the thing that supports my other passions, which are theater and writing.
Interesting. So I guess I want to ask you a question about your friends and cohort. Do you see in your lives the women around you emerging, that word emerging, which Hollywood uses a lot of times as young, where women and people of color don't necessarily have the same opportunities. So it's not necessarily about age. It's about opportunity emerging for me. So I want to kind of ask you, what's your definition of emerging? And do you feel like the women and people around you are constantly emerging? Is this like a state of being now? Either one of you.
I can go. I mean, I feel like the collaborators I've had are yes, constantly emerging. I think you stop emerging when you stop growing, and also when you're so made that you don't have to wait for opportunities. And I've been very fortunate with the people that I've worked with. The majority of my collaborators have been women who have inspired me and who I aspire to have a career like. So it began in 1993 with Anna Devere Smith when I was assisting her on Twilight Los Angeles, 1992. It's continued with artists like Micheline Thomas, whose first film I produced, Carrie Mae Weems, whom I've worked for on a number of projects, and Catherine Gund at Aubin Pictures, and the most recent film that we worked on, Aggie, about her mother, Agnes Gund, and the creation of the Art for Justice Fund. And just learning from the women around me and also imparting what I've learned to the women who work with me who are younger. It's always important to me on any project I work on to have a multi-generational as well as a multicultural team, and to have as many women as possible on that team.
Absolutely. Kenyatta, your thoughts on the emerging concept?
Sure. I think emerging is an interesting word. It does connote that you emerge young at a young age, but I feel like we're always emerging in new phases of our lives. When I think about the people that I've collaborated with in the past or worked for or were mentored by, one of the things that gives me great hope and joy just for the future of my career, even at this age, are the people who are a little older than me who are still reinventing themselves. So when I think of emerging can be this, it's like this cocoon that you come out of. But what I realize about life is that cycle repeats itself, right? So it's not one time that you emerge. You're really reinventing yourself. And sometimes you have to pivot or go back in a cocoon, rethink things, or try something new. Emerging also means taking risks to me. So the more risk you take, the more times you're going to have to get in that emerging zone. And so in terms of my collaborators, there are people I started in the industry with who their trajectory has been faster and reached higher heights at this point. And that's fantastic. And so for me, I had to realize I had to sort of figure out what was my path. And I think everyone emerges at different stages, but they also can reemerge and reinvent themselves. And I had to do that. I had to reinvent myself 10 years ago when I figured out I wanted to transition from, or not transition, but broaden what I was trying to do from film to also include TV. And that felt like a whole new learning period for me.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, the word emerging has a negative connotation in the industry because it's about, like
Neophyte.
Like in our, when we do labs and things like that, the criteria is like emerging. And for us at first, it was about the money that you earned. And now we're just more like, no, we need to broaden that to being about, different kinds of successes that people have, particularly women. But I know that in the emerging, Kenyatta, can you put your mute on for a sec? Thanks. And I know for like in the industry where there are so many kind of programs, right? Inclusion programs and writing programs and all these structures that they think is a place where people can come in and learn and then emerge. And so I'm just wondering, I know Kenyatta, you've gone through some of these kinds of programs. I have some friends who've like basically been in a cycle of programs. And so it's like, how do we use that definition of emerging to like break the cycle in some way? How does the industry rethink how people need jobs? It's not only you need to shadow people, right? So talk a little bit about your thoughts on that, Kenyatta.
Well, I am, first of all, grateful for the programs that I've been in. And I'm still going through them. This year I was in the Women in Film Blacklist episodic program. And what I realized, until I actually sort of land that staffing job or reach that benchmark where I'm a full-time working writer, I'm going to keep going through these programs. And maybe the industry sees emerging negatively, but I actually see it the opposite. And the programs, I think people, when they go into the programs, which I think are great for what they are, you have to go in with a strategy and you have to go in knowing what it's actually for. And all it's for is a platform and an opportunity to expand your network. Mm-hmm. So that's the reason why I've been in those programs, and I'll continue until I can transition into full-time on a staff show. Mm-hmm. So, but in terms of how do we break out of the cycle, I think that's individual for every person coming through, because as we know, as William Goldman says, nobody knows anything in this industry. So it's really about forging your own path. And that's I think that's synonymous with emerging, right? Mm-hmm. Like figuring out what your own path is and being really strategic about any opportunity that you get and forging a network of people who are your champions around you. And that's what the programs give you. And they're supposed to propel you, but they're not promising you, to get you or land you that writing assignment or that staffing assignment. I never looked at them that way.
And Tanya, I mean, you've had experience in the theater, and in all different pieces of this industry. I don't know if you've been in kind of one of these programs, but I'm sure you've seen a lot of that. So I'd love to hear your experience on these emerging artist programs.
Well, my feeling is that there is a serious pipeline problem in the Hollywood system, and there's a whole ecosystem that has resulted in that problem. And it involves the funders of pipeline programs, it involves the entertainment companies and the creatives that already have their foot in the door. So there's a little bit of kind of chipping away at that ecosystem and reshaping it so that there is more of a substantive and tangible pipeline that actually results not just in training, but in vocation, in jobs. Like take, for example, a fellowship that might be to have a writer of color in a writer's room. That fellowship ends, the writer's not there anymore. So it's like the tokenism has to be really monitored. And that requires accountability on the part of all these components of the ecosystem. I will say, though, that over the past year, I've been really heartened by many of the formerly emerging filmmakers that have now kind of crossed over. And like 3 of the films that inspired me the most over the past year were films that were by people who had previously been considered emerging filmmakers, all women. That would be Chloe Zhao's Nomadland,
Right.
Garrett Bradley's Time,
Right.
and Heidi Ewing's Te Llevo Conmigo.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it was Heidi's first narrative film, although she had a career in documentary.
Right.
Garrett's first feature film. And Chloe has been really kind of in the trenches making beautiful films. And now all of a sudden, everybody wants her. So it's like, you never know when you're going to cross over.
Right.
And I think that's really important to keep in mind too. So what I say to younger filmmakers is identify the person whose career you most want to emulate and understand how they got to where they are. And often you'll find it's on being like true to themselves, being authentic, and working really, really, really hard, and also gathering their allies and community around them, because no film happens without a community around it.
Yep. Thank you, Tanya. I think you just touched on an important word, the authenticity word. And I think that in some respects, stories that I've heard anecdotally about, women's authenticity, women of color's authenticity has been a deficit previously, just in terms of how people are treated in the industry. And now I'm wondering if you guys have any thoughts on authenticity being a plus for women and women of color and people of color. Do you think this is something that we're seeing change? Either one of you.
I would say yes. I've been in this industry long enough to see this part.
Kenyetta, we are not hearing you. You're breaking up a little bit.
Okay.
Can we start again?
Should I jump in?
Yeah, why don't you jump in?
Okay. So the authenticity, I think that there is a narrative shift that is happening, but there are still widespread systemic problems. And we saw with the uprisings last year against racism, there were a lot of public-facing pronouncements by entertainment companies in particular about their support of the protests, but private-facing, not much systemic change.
Right.
And the fact that, Melissa, you and I have talked about this before, the fact that some of the top streaming films last summer were The Help and 365 Days, like that doesn't just happen. There's like a whole series of systems that allows for that to happen. So I feel like there's a ton more work to do when it comes to especially gender justice in the narrative space and in Hollywood. And that's going to involve an audit. And good luck with that audit, because I wonder how many companies are going to actually self-report on their data about their hiring practices, about the projects that get greenlit, and on and on and on.
Yeah, that's not going to happen. All right. So we were last talking about kind of the ecosystem surrounding the pipeline and these emerging type programs that are happening. And so one of the questions I have next is, what are the barriers that you see for women of color entering the industry? And do you think that is shifting at all?
I feel like there are many barriers. So to break it down, one of the barriers is women of color being seen as catering to niche audiences. That is a massive problem. It's patently untrue.
So basically what the industry says is that films that people of color make, and they also say it about women's movies, are for women and for people of color, but they're not universal.
Correct. That is not true.
Right.
And that is where the ecosystem needs to change, because with the right community around a project, with the right promotion of a project, we've seen time and again how movies pop.
Right.
So, making the film is the hard part. Making sure that people see it is the harder part.
Right. Right. So I just want to tell people that we did lose Kenyatta's connection. We are going to try to get her back, but we don't want to lose our time with Tanya because she has so many great things to say. So we're going to just keep going. So we talked a little bit before about authenticity, and I guess pay the price of authenticity. Is the price changing? Are people able to be more successful being themselves now? Is that the world we're hopefully moving into?
For sure. One remarkable repercussion of the tragedy of 2020, we saw a descendancy of celebrity culture and an ascendancy of everyday people culture.
Right.
Our heroes changed. Our heroes now were essential workers, first responders. And that, to me, I hope that stays, so that we see that reflected in the pop culture figures and the stories that we are immersed in. And so I think authenticity is going to become more important. And also, as I was saying before, there is a narrative shift that needs to happen. And that narrative shift we are on the cusp of.
Right. It's the narrative has to be centered, right? Different narratives have to be centered. And in the industry, the centering of narratives also has to do with money, right? So it's about investing in those narratives, believing in those narratives, and how they can soar, which you were talking about, marketing, distribution, and things like that, believing that these narratives are worthy. And I don't think that people are going to be able to get away with not doing that anymore.
Well, this is where the pessimist in me comes out.
Right.
Because to change that aspect will involve a large number of people ceding power.
Right.
And that's not going to happen.
Right.
A lot of the big changes that did happen were because of the uprisings last year against racism, and previously because of the Me Too movement.
Right.
And seeing many people in power being dethroned because they were perpetrators.
Right.
And last year, many people becoming dethroned because they had exhibited racist behavior.
Right.
It shouldn't take that to have people cede power.
Right.
You know? So I feel there has to be more of a deep reflection on the part of companies about who's at the decision-making tables and who is greenlighting projects. Like, for instance, the way the news media is so biased in its coverage is because too often there are not women making decisions about what goes on the news.
Right.
We can apply that to film and television. Too often, there are not women making decisions about what projects get greenlit and what projects get promoted.
Right. Right. No, it's 100% true. And that is the frustrating part, because you see these artists emerging and you see the potential there, and you're just like, look at that person, look at that person, look at that person. And then you see a couple people get deals and you're like, ooh, cool. But then the same people get 6 and 7 deals, right? And you're just like, wait, spread the wealth, right? There's got to be more people emerging than
Yes.
just these 3 people who are getting all the deals. So that I find frustrating too, which is, okay, we found our person and we're going to keep putting that person forward, instead of really doing the work. I think part of, like for us at the Athena Film Festival, we actually want to tell people how many women-directed films we have, which we're focused on women's leadership, so we have a lot of women's film, and how many films directed by women of color.
Mm-hmm.
Deliberately, proactively.
Mm-hmm.
And so many film festivals will say, we don't count, it's not numbers, we don't know, we don't look at who's submitting the film to us. And I think that's a lie, firstly.
Right.
There's so many big lies, not the biggest lie, but there are so many big lies in the narrative of the entertainment industry. And one of them is that we look at all the films that are submitted to your festival, right?
Yeah.
And so you who have submitted things to festivals and have gone around to lots of different places to, how do we get, or can we get people to really understand that it's not bad to actually know who's submitting to your festival and who you're programming? It's actually good.
I think being intentional in the way programming is approached is crucial to addressing the pipeline problem.
Right.
And I think being intentional in how committees are formed, advisory councils are formed, programming teams are formed, will result in, I think, better programming, and also in more transparency. Because transparency is key to understanding how we got to this place where we don't have enough of the wealth to spread around, as you're talking about, with the same people getting big deals over and over and over again. And it's amazing when women, get through that door. What I also hope will happen is that more people who have established themselves in the industry as creatives create their own pipeline programs, which some are doing, create their own pipeline programs, and also mentor people.
Yep.
Mentorship is so important.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of the things we figured out is that we have to put voices that we want to see and we want to hear into the pipeline. We do our piece. We want to expand it much more, because that's the only way you're going to get to see the content that you want, which is to actually do it yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think about the word success? Like, when a couple of years ago, when we were having conversations about financial successes of movies at the box office, it's always about those ones that open the biggest, because that's what people pay attention to. But you look at, say, Deborah Granick's Winter's Bone, cost $1 million, made $10 million, big success, right? But it's not acknowledged in that way. So how do you define success, and how do we think about success in a different way in this industry?
I smiled when you asked that question. How do you define success? Because I have a cheat sheet that I refer to whenever I am working on a project, whether it be a live show or a digital content or a film or television. And it's like a cheat sheet of markers of success. So that we're not thinking of success in very narrowly defined terms, but that we broaden it. So it's like, for example, the number of people that see your work, the number of people that talk about your work, the number of people that share your work, the number of press that that cover your work, and then obviously the amount of revenue that is brought in. And then another step is like, what kind of impact did it have? And that impact can be quantified and qualified. What kind of social impact does it have?
Right.
Does it change hearts and minds? Does it result in legislation, public awareness? So there are so many different markers of success. And I think broadening what success means, that it's not one or the other, is crucial.
When you think about art, because there are so many different definitions of art, how can we create a word related to art? Because sometimes people use the word art to dismiss other folks. And so, I think some films are art, some films are not art. But am I wrong? I don't know. But I just want to kind of like hear from you, who's worked in so many different mediums, like how you think about art.
Well, art is in the eye of the beholder. The experience of art is a subjective one. And it is fascinating to me how two people, even like-minded people, can react very differently to a work of art.
Right.
About art as a concept, I believe that art cannot be dismissed. My mantra is art is essential to democracy. And art can convey ideas and emotions that might not otherwise be conveyed.
Absolutely.
And art can change the world.
Totally
But
agree.
art can change the world with the right allies engaging with that art. And we've seen so many examples. And one of my favorite books is Art and Physics by Leonard Schlain, Tiffany Schlain's father, where he wrote about how, and this blew my mind because I read it fairly early in my own artistic career, about how advances in art often predated advances in science. So artists visioned things before scientists discovered them. And I think, as an unfortunately relevant example, in the early days of the pandemic, I'm curious if you did this, Melissa, but I rewatched Contagion.
Oh, yeah.
And when I watched it, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly what we're in for. It was mind-blowing to me how much they got the science of it down in this work of art.
Yeah.
So that everything that followed kind of came true.
I mean, if you want to get your mind blown about that, Laurie Garrett's book, like The Coming Plague from like the 90s. Okay. Do you think you're a resilient person?
I actually have a sweater by Lingua Franca that I had resilient embroidered onto.
So that would be a yes.
That would be a yes. It's a word that has been used to describe me a lot. I actually won an award from this wonderful organization, the Memo, a Women of Resilience Award. But I will say this, there are two sides to that coin of resilience. I'm also tired of people having to be resilient. We should stop having to overcome.
Right.
We should stop having to pick ourselves up off the ground and rise again.
Right. Let's just talk briefly about your book, which is coming out next week, Assume Nothing, A Story of Intimate Violence. It is a book that is just the definition to me of resilience. And so powerful and brave. And so I just wanted to hear from you a little bit about why you thought it was important to share such intimacies, what happened to you with people, and what you hope people to learn from it.
Well, for people who are watching who might not know what the book is about, it tells my own story of intimate violence that I experienced at the hands of the former New York State Attorney General. And it also tells many other people's stories. And the narrative draws readers in and then gives them resources for how to spot, stop, and prevent intimate partner violence. And one of my, silly mantras is when life throws you lemons, make art. And I felt like I had an opportunity to turn a negative experience into a positive by writing about it and giving people this book that they could pass along to friends who might be experiencing intimate violence, and to people who are survivors of intimate violence, because the trauma sinks in at a cellular level that scientists well understand, whether the moment of abuse lasts for a few minutes or for many years. And it's a marker of time before and after. And there is big healing that needs to happen because we have normalized the cycle of violence for centuries.
Right.
And we need to chip away at it.
And you decided to even tell your story to the New Yorker because you wanted to make sure that other people could learn from it and know the signs.
Yes, because it wasn't just
other people.
Yeah, it wasn't just my story. Other women shared it, not just in my particular situation with this abuser, but millions of women and men. And my hope is that because millions of people experience some type of sexual violence with an intimate partner before they're 18 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So my dream reader are high school students.
Mm-hmm.
My dream reader is also men. I want men to read this book because, they are products of the conditioning that encourages men to power over rather than power with.
Have you thought about making a documentary related to this at all?
I hadn't thought about it, but the book has been optioned by ABC Signature Disney Television.
Okay.
It is in active development and
As a narrative.
As a narrative, yep.
Okay.
As a dramatization for a limited run series. And Joanna Coles is executive producing, and I am really honored and grateful that the book will be turned into a series so that the message can reach a larger audience.
And those kids that you were talking about. Yeah. Well, thank you. Okay, so last question.
Yes.
What advice?
Melissa, you're in the book.
I am. I'm honored.
Well, because you were with me the night before the special prosecutor made an announcement about the criminal investigation.
Oh my, I didn't remember that. All I remember is that when we were going to see the Samantha Bee show, you had to give up your pepper spray.
Yes.
And I think you had other things in your bag. And I just was like, in a fog. But yeah, I could just only imagine how you felt. So if you wanted to share some advice, not necessarily only about the intimate violence piece of this, but the kind of emerging and resilience piece of it, because I think that you were just an amazing role model on that. You didn't choose that necessarily, that piece of it, but you have stepped up in such a profound way. Not everybody could. So what advice would you share of the journey of resilience and emerging as an artist?
to gather your community around you and surround yourself with love and find opportunities to experience joy. Because as we've learned in this pandemic, we have each other and we have an uncertain future. So be present in the now. And that is my advice.
Yeah.
And also for those who are in positions of power, to create space for others to enter, because there's enough room.
Yeah. It's an abundance, not a scarcity.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Melissa.